like no other keeper I have ever seen. I mean, the way he was able to kick up. Well,
So let's talk about football now and go to the military. And what I always love speaking with you, Ben, is that you never show any doubt that Ukraine is winning this war. Finally, they will win. This is about psychology, and that's why and many Ukrainians and many people worldwide love hearing you, as I do. Welcome back to the channel, Ben.
thank you very much for the privilege, Christoph. And I just wish that this morning we were celebrating a German football victory, but we're not. And now I hope that the U.S. is able to win on Wednesday night.
Yes, so we are now on the side of the US, and as we said, this analogy, it's about winning and losing, and there are so many unfair situations also, which I remember, for example, that the Americans stopped their military aid to Ukraine, and what the Ukrainians are doing out of this is just incredible. On our last interview, we talked about Crimea. It was a moment still when not the majority of speakers have mentioned Crimea, but now everybody in the mainstream media is mentioning that Crimea is turning into an island. So are you seeing now Ukraine on the path to victory? How do you see the situation now, Ben?
Well, of course, what you are reminding all of your listeners is that war is a test of logistics and it's a test of will. It's not just a math problem. And people that discounted Ukraine or Crimea or said there's no way that Ukraine can win, they'll never get Crimea back, is because they were thinking in a very linear, like it would have to be a amphibious invasion, a Normandy invasion. That was the only way you could get Crimea back. And I just thought that that was short-sighted and unimaginative in those non-believers. But I can read a map, and when I look at the geography of Crimea, it's obvious how important Crimea is. There's a reason that Catherine the Great took it back at the end of the 18th century, was to protect Russia's coastline from the Ottoman Navy. But it's Ukrainian sovereign territory, and Russia had agreed to this back almost 75 years ago. And so I think that the Ukrainians know that they could not there would never be any sort of real peace with Russia as long as Russia controlled Crimea. From Crimea, the Russians are able to disrupt merchant traffic coming out of Odessa and Mykolaiv. They're able to block access up into Azov Sea, which is, according to agreement between Russia and Ukraine, inland waters shared by the two. Um, there are oil and gas reserves under the Black Sea in that northwest corner there. So Crimea is important for much more than just a summer holiday location. So I think it looks to me that the tide has definitely shifted. The momentum is in favor of Ukraine. It's not guaranteed to last, but they've got to put the pedal to the metal, as we say. Don't let the Russians get back up.
Yeah, that's when we take the analogy of games, it comes into my mind also chess. And you said checkmate. So the Ukrainians are turning the Russians into a situation of checkmate. Can you see it
Well,
like that too?
um, I do believe that it would be very difficult for the Kremlin to deal with the loss of Crimea. I mean, this played such an important role in the whole psychology of what they were doing, their justification, and to be defeated on the Black Sea and forced to withdraw from Crimea by Ukraine, which doesn't even have a navy in the traditional sense. That would really be a blow. That would be a blow to the will. It'll be difficult to explain to the Russian people. I mean, you still got thousands of Russians that are there in Crimea for their summer holiday now, which to me is unbelievable. Now, I think that the way the Ukrainians are doing this is to isolate it by attacking all the connections to the peninsula, and also making it untenable so that Russian forces cannot use the Navy facilities, the airfields, the logistics hubs. It's making it very difficult for them.
Yes, but we should also not only watch Crimea, despite its the decisive terrain as you mentioned, but also watch the other northern parts like Liman and Sumy and all those regions. There on those front lines, the Ukrainians are also not lazy, aren't they?
Yeah, the what the Ukrainians have done on the ground with this famous kill zone that they've created has stopped. It seems to me that it has stopped Russia's ability to make any progress on the ground. And this has also enabled the Ukrainians to thin their lines a little bit, to pull. They don't have as many troops exposed up there because of what they've created. And of course, I don't know, and I should not know what the operational design is, which the Ukrainian General Staff is using. What is their main effort? Is it down around Crimea? Is it up in Zaporizhia, or is
Hmm.
it up on the north?
Yeah.
Um, but nobody has enough to attack everywhere all the time. So I imagine that they are allocating their resources based on the priority and on the design for how they are conducting operations. Um, but you're right. I mean, there's nobody just sitting around in Ukrainian armed forces. That's for sure.
The Ukrainians, they are also forcing the Russians to pull away their air defense in a way that they are attacking Moscow with long middle range missile hits, and they are also trying to develop a ballistic missile. Even can you give us some information on that
Oh,
ballistic?
no, you're exactly right. I think you and I have discussed this before, that throughout history, Russia's strength was its vastness. The country is so big that it could just absorb invaders until they could be kicked out or destroyed. Now that vastness seems to be a vulnerability, because Ukraine has developed the capability to reach 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 kilometers deep into Russia to hit oil and gas facilities, factories, and other critical, valuable targets. And Russia cannot defend all of them. And of course, it looks like they have prioritized protecting Moscow, but that leaves everything else quite vulnerable, and the Ukrainians are making them pay for it. And this is before they get their own ballistic missile. That will really be something when the Ukrainians are able to launch a ballistic missile against some of these targets.
So this is for me. On the one hand, it's fantastic that the Ukrainians are performing so well and they're developing their stuff. They also have been the technological center of the Soviet Union, and all those great airplanes like the Antonov and whatever they have been developed in Ukraine. That's why Ukraine is so important for Putin. But on the other side, for me, it's just not to understand that so many in Europe and now and also the United States, Joe Biden and now Donald Trump, of course, they are not helping Ukraine with all they can. So let's get back to the analogy of the games once again, of matches. People always want to be on the sides of winners. Ukraine is starting to win. Why aren't we Europeans more trying to be on the side of the winner?
Um, I
Ukraine.
don't, yeah, I don't understand why my own country, as well as the rest of Europe, um, are not totally committed to helping Ukraine win.
Yeah,
Uh, Everybody is, or almost everybody is providing something. Even the U.S. still does provide some support, intelligence support, and allows other things to happen. Um, but the problem is that almost nobody has said it is our national policy, our strategic objective, that Ukraine wins, that Ukraine defeats Russia, that Ukraine completely restores its sovereign borders back to 1991 borders.
absolutely.
If you don't, so if you don't make that clear that that's your objective, then it's unlikely you're going to allocate the resources and make the policies and do what's necessary to achieve that. And so you end up with countries, well, we'll provide this, but it stops short of saying it's in our interest, not just because we want to be on the winning side. It's in our interest, our strategic interest, that Russia is defeated, that a young democracy, Ukraine, is able to survive and prosper, and then join NATO or join the EU. All these other things, which Russia does not want, but it's in our interest that they do. So I think that the key to this would be finally the German Bundeskanzler, the French president, the British prime minister, the Polish everybody saying it's our interest that Ukraine wins, and we're going to do whatever it takes for them to win.
And this is exactly true what you said, but it's mad that just recently, 3 days ago, on the Ukrainian Recovery Conference in Gdansk, in Danzig, in Poland, our German Bundeschancellor, whom I am really disappointed of, by the way, can mention it later, but he said that he used Russian propaganda phrases. He said that the the war must be frozen now on the front line. It must be frozen to stop the killing. He was using those words, which are completely from the Russian propagandists. I was shocked.
Time has come to enter into negotiations, to freeze the front line and to end the killing.
Yes, I was shocked what you make out of that.
I don't know who this benefits to freeze the conflict. I mean,
yeah.
If anybody believes that Russia would not resume again as soon as they can in a variety of different ways, I think that is short-sighted. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people in all of our countries, Germany, the United States, and others, that willingly accept the Russian perspective on this.
And this is unfortunate. And how does it happen? I cannot. It's it's about political will. You mention always also that winning a war is about logistics, ammunition, and technology, and political will. Which one of those three is the most important one?
Well, you can't win without all of those. I mean, you have to have the logistics and you have to have the will. Napoleon, of course, would say that the moral is to the physical as 3 is to 1. So in other words, the moral component, the will, is the most important part. That's, the United States, we lost wars to the Vietnamese and to the Taliban, even though we had all the advantages, but they had the superior will. And the Russians, the Soviets, were kicked out of Afghanistan for the same reason. So what is lacking is will, and I hope that our leaders will develop or rediscover their moral backbone and explain to all of our populations why this is important, why it's in our interests that Ukraine is able to defend itself and regain all of its sovereignty. Otherwise, Russia will be back. I mean, the history is full of that.
Yeah, it is full of that, and the will is in a democracy created by the governments which are elected by people. That's other than in a dictatorship as Russia. So our people here in Germany, I just can't speak for Germans usually. We are very much disturbed in our minds because, and I think it's Russia standing behind all of that with the disinformation. So if this is the most important thing, how can we change the minds? This is a question I'm also asking a lot of times to people I'm talking to, but I never get an answer which I'm satisfied with. Probably you can give me one.
No, look, the Russians have always wanted to break up NATO, break up the EU, create a wedge between North America and Europe, and they use disinformation in a lot of different ways, endlessly, to put this narrative forward, which unfortunately so many people have. I was just in the UK the other day for a few days, and it's there. I mean, you still have people that are willing to um, believe or accept it, or it's like, well, Russia's too big, or this was theirs anyway, or NATO, it was NATO's fault. I mean, all of these absolute, easily provable lies, disprovable lies, but yet they're out there. And so only when leaders like the Bundeskanzler, like the president, like the prime minister say, this is nonsense, this is absolute nonsense, dot, 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 and we are going to help Ukraine win because it's in our interest. Um, and then I think most people, if they believe that the leadership is being honest with them and speaking plainly, then most people would say, okay, I don't like it, but okay. And so far, almost nobody's done it. Not even President Biden, who did a lot to help Ukraine. He could never say, we want Ukraine to win. Certainly, President Trump is never going to do that.
Absolutely not. I had an impression that Hillary Clinton was very clear about Russia, what kind of people they were. So I would have liked if she would have become the first
Yeah,
female
but don't
president.
forget, she was also the Secretary of State with this ridiculous reset button with
Oh,
with Lavrov. I mean,
oh,
they were also naive in the Obama administration that somehow you could deal with Russia as if they were some normal,
oh, oh.
European country.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I was not aware of that. So it's but just as you said, the political leaders with their example, they are shaping also the minds of the people they have been elected.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
and here I am really once again I must mention it disappointed by our now actual chancellor Friedrich Merz, but before it was Olaf Scholz, who I was much more disappointed also because he said Zeitenwende, this famous word, and there were no actions of all, and before him it was Angela Merkel. Of her I was also very disappointed because she was the chancellor who prevented Ukraine from coming into NATO, together with the French, those days, President Nicolas Sarkozy. It was in 2008, Bucharest summit. So this was a huge mistake. How can we change this mindset in our leaderships?
You have to talk about interests. What are the strategic interests? Why it's in our interest that Ukraine is successful. If Russia is not defeated, if they're allowed to retain control of part of Ukraine, for example, or whatever sort of frozen conflict or ceasefire or negotiated settlement, then that means that the UN Charter is worth nothing, that it's okay for nations to use force to change the sovereign borders of another nation, to invade another nation. So this is a principle that everybody agreed after the Second World War had to be upheld. And yet here we are ready to, some people are ready to, well, except in the case of Russia. Number two, Russia's actions, of course, are focused on, or what they've done has disrupted energy and food supplies to the world by the attacks on grain shipments or the theft of grain shipments, the disruption of oil and gas shipments in the region. All of these things have affected every country in Europe and the United States. Well, this is what Russia does, and so there's another reason to help Ukraine defeat them. And then, of course, the idea of people who want to live in a democratic society. This is again this is part of the UN Charter that people get to make their own choices about their government, who they associate with, etc. That's the last thing Russia wants. So why would we give Russia the ability or the authority to dictate what Ukraine does? Ukraine sees how much better life got for Poland and Baltic countries and others when they became free from the Soviet Union, and when they were able to join the European Union. They want to be a part of the West, and that seems to me something that is worth protecting. But really the sanctity of borders, the sovereign borders, that's important. Otherwise, how are you going to, if borders not really sovereign, how do nations expect to solve migration problems, immigrant problems, if you also don't have legally recognized borders?
So all those things are from very, very old already, since the creation of NATO after the Second World War. It's so important, and we have probably lost it now. And to get it back, we need some strong measures. Otherwise, we would lose this war also. And the last thing I would like to ask you today, Ben, is don't we acknowledge here in Europe and in the West that we are at war with Russia?
The Russians are absolutely at war with us. That doesn't mean that Iskander missiles are flying into Bremerhaven. They're not. But drones are disrupting or violating our airspace all over Europe, which has a significant impact when airports have to shut down. They clearly are conducting sabotage against infrastructure, rail, pipelines, underwater cables. They have conducted assassination. They have assassinated people and attempted to assassinate people across Europe. The Shadow Fleet vessels are illegally carrying oil and gas out through the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea, which goes to customers, which then helps pay for Russia's war against Europe. So the sooner that we acknowledge that Russia actually is at war with us and take steps to inflict consequences on them, the sooner we can stop it. The reason they do this, of course, is to scare populations so that they put pressure on their governments to stop supporting Ukraine,
to freeze the front line,
or to withhold certain weapons because they're scared Russia might be coming here next. And so all of this is designed to hurt Ukraine. And so this is where European leaders have got to figure out ways to work together and inflict consequences on Russia for what they're doing.
Yeah, but the problem is that our governments, they could be elected in the wrong way, and that we could get AfD or pro-Russian parties in other countries, and that the opposition against Russia would even be weaker. So this would be probably next for our next session, because the time is running out, Ben. And once again, thank you very much. But I thought you gave us really good hope also that Ukraine is winning, but we have to do our homework here too in Europe.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ben. Until the next time.
Okay, Christoph. Bis zum nächsten Mal.
That was once again a great conversation with General Ben Hodges. But unfortunately, I forgot to mention an important message, especially to my German-speaking audience, because as you know, I make interviews in English and in German language. And I uploaded it all into the same channel, this one here. But this confused the algorithm. So I just created a new channel. It's called Talk for Ukraine Deutsch. So please make sure that you will subscribe also to the new channel. It is linked down below. And also subscribe please to my Substack newsletter if you like not to miss any new episode. I'm Christoph Müller and you're watching Talk for Ukraine. See you in the next one.